What are some of the new things that you're seeing in mobile relative to what companies were doing maybe 5 years ago? What are some of the fresh ideas?
Sure. Well, everything contrasted. So I've been doing digital media now for 20 years. So I got in very early at Young and Rubicam, and so I saw it from that perspective. I remember when the CIO there would deny the company having internet access at their desktop. They didn't think that was important to anybody. And then I had an opportunity to run the IAB in the internet industry back in 2001. And even at that stage, I think companies there were still pockets of people. There's not a marketer today who denies that mobile isn't critical to their business. I mean, I almost, in some regard, I think there's a natural reaction. I don't think it's corporate politicking per se, but it almost would feel like career suicide for you to say that mobile's not important. So that's a huge transformation, and which is why the MMA is very marketer focused. We work with Procter and Unilever and everybody else to really help figure out this next generation. And we were talking a little bit backstage here. Everybody I ask, everybody says today more than 50% of their traffic that they see comes through mobile. So I think everybody's got it. Nobody denies it. And if you have teenagers in the household, yeah, you really know it. Yep.
And so do you see companies, now that they know that mobile is really important, do you see common trends across the companies that you work with, or are people attacking this in different ways?
Yeah, the most common phrase I hear is, and I don't think that anybody's succeeding at this, maybe just to set your minds at ease, is the concept. In fact, I was talking to a major packaged goods company leader today, just this morning, and he said, yes, he says, we're really committed to mobile first, but we execute horribly against it. So I think it's the state of just sort of where we are. But just that acceptance and adoption and understanding of the consumer trend and an appreciation for the consumer trend is really, in some regards, the first step.
Why are companies so bad at it? What's the challenge that you hear?
Yeah, I think I'll tell you my sense of it, and I'd be curious what the other panelists sort of think about it too. Is that and having done this and watched the adoption, for a lot of years, I've been doing advertising marketing 30 years, so I've seen the broader perspective. I just think that I think the next new thing is really hard. It just is. I think that we're under-resourced, we're understaffed. I don't think we really know how to organize internally for new things, and yet new things are coming at us at a rate faster than ever. And I just, how do you allocate something that might be a small percentage of what you're doing now? I mean, most companies may be spending, $100,000, $1 million in mobile, nothing compared to the 100 million they might be spending. And so can you really devote the time and energy to figure that out? It's part of what a trade group does, is try to help accelerate that and sort of shorten the learning cycle. I think it's human nature, and it's no more than that. And yet, we've done some research we can talk about later that really suggests that a first mover advantage can have significant value, not just to your campaigns, but ultimately to market cap and market value. So it's a serious issue. It's still challenging.
Jon, maybe we could go to you just to ask how you've thought about this at Kellogg. Kellogg, obviously a very old, well-known brand. How did mobile change the company's broader marketing strategy when you came on?
Yeah, and I'd probably just continue on with Greg's comments. It's interesting. We do talk about mobile first. I think the industry talks about it. We talk about it at Kellogg's. And yet, I think with a heavy dose of humility, we've made great strides in this area, but we are woefully behind where we need to be. And I need to put that in context, too, because where we need to be is not so much versus the competitive set. Our wonderful competitors and the General Mills and the Unilevers and so forth of the world, but it's the consumer. And as we were talking, backstage, I think the biggest barrier that we have got to overcome is speed to market. As again, Greg said, it's absolutely clear that mobile's key. No one is denying that. We have more than enough data to suggest that. But even if you look at, I think it's a Mary Meeker slide, if I'm crediting it correctly, it looked at time spent per major channel, print, newspaper, TV, et cetera, and mobile was in there. And mobile usage, both on a penetration and a time spent, is fairly significant, as you would expect, and yet media spend, as that is the criteria, is incredibly low, right? So we all believe that the consumer should be the true north, and yet we still don't see action follow that true north. So that's a really key. So I'm particularly focused on the behavioral side of this. How do we take not only the data, but more importantly, the insights, and then create experiences that meet the consumer's expectations.
When you say that it sounds like what you're describing is sort of a disproportionate investment relative to where consumers are spending their time, if I understand you correctly. So is a challenge in making the case that more dollars should go to mobile, is it that it's harder to see the ROI? Why isn't investment moving there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that keeps me up at night, honestly. And I think if I kind of unpack that, there are a couple key things. First of all, marketers in general go to what they know. I think maybe Greg, you alluded to that, the playbook, right? Kellogg is a 100-plus-year-old company. And we've been fairly successful at crafting messages and delivering that in a mass media environment. And we know it does drive volume, and we've got decades and decades of proof behind it. We don't have the playbook for mobile. Right. So that's that tension. You know it's important, you look at the data, you look at what consumers are doing, but we don't have the playbook. And we really, truly, first and foremost, don't have a great understanding of the value proposition in mobile. That's not to say we're not, we still are doing significant amount of efforts in mobile, so it's not as if we're void of it. But I think it's important to put that in context to your question about we understand TV intimately. We know print, and for that matter, we know online display and online video now in 2015 really well. And we've got the ROI, we've got the marketing mix models that can tell us TV, print, online display, online video, search, and how they're driving it, how they're driving volume and building brand equity. Only in really the last, I'd say, 18 months have we started to get great visibility into how mobile, and I think Greg's going to hopefully even share some more research on that, but where our marketing mix models are starting to give us visibility into the ROI on mobile.
So Julie, Dropbox obviously a very different kind of company than Kellogg's, much newer. How are you thinking about mobile within Dropbox's broader strategy?
Absolutely. So mobile is essential to Dropbox. And if you think about what Dropbox does, we provide a way for people to very simply sync and share their files across multiple devices. And one of the big drivers for the growth of the company has been mobile, because as people start to decouple from the desktop, they need to have the files that are important to them at their fingertips, no matter what device they're on. So mobile is incredibly important to us, just in terms of that's how our users use our product. That's part of their workflow. So we're constantly looking at what are users doing on mobile, and how can Dropbox continue to add features and capability as their expectations of what they can do on mobile continue to grow. And we've seen that happen, that as users have more powerful mobile devices, as we go into markets that are more of mobile-only markets, people not only want to view their information on mobile, they actually want to start interacting with it. They want to be saving it onto the mobile device, to Dropbox from the mobile device. They want to be able to edit the documents. So we're really seeing people on mobile moving from a point where they're kind of viewing information to where they're really interacting with information. So it really is a key pillar of how we think about the business at Dropbox, and a driver both for individuals with photos and the documents that are important to them, as well as businesses, because we see businesses moving to a workflow which absolutely includes mobile as a critical part of the workflow. From a marketing standpoint, we think about where the users are. So of course there's insights to be gained in terms of what they're doing on mobile, but to the point of the playbook, we also think about it a lot in the marketing mix. And I absolutely agree with John's point that there's no playbook for it. So what we've found is you really have to have a perspective of experimentation and test. And it's something that's very much built into the Dropbox culture. So even as we're approaching what kind of marketing is going to work for us on mobile, one driver is that for people to hit their KPIs, they have to be thinking about mobile because it's such a big part of our business. But figuring out, as you think about the marketing funnel and building awareness and gaining preference, knowing what will be successful on mobile and how you measure it is incredibly important. And starting to get alignment on what are you trying to achieve and what are the metrics that make sense given that platform, I think is an evolution, because there is no playbook yet.
So that's a really interesting question. I'd love to hear your thoughts, John, on that. That when you're testing new strategies on mobile, how iterative is it? How do you evolve as you get different data on a particular type of mobile strategy? What does that look like internally at Kellogg's?
What it looks like is not fast enough. And just being honest, we're a house of brands, so we're supporting, right, from Frosted Flakes to Cheez-It, from Eggo to Kashi and Morningstar Farms, and to step and repeat that level of agility, again, in a 100-plus-year-old company is challenging. And I would suggest to you that it is actually the biggest barrier for us to success. I mean, I would love to. I mean, we need to be more like Dropbox in many ways, and largely that's around, again, agility and the ability to, quite frankly, activate more quickly. We have more than enough information. We have healthy investment. That's not our issue. It's just that we're fundamentally, and I'm obviously saying this from a Kellogg point of view, but I know my colleagues across the CPG industry would agree, we simply are not designed the way we need to be to compete. I'd like to say in the future, but to compete right now is more accurate.
So, yeah, Greg, do you want to jump in?
So I want to pick up what John and Julie were saying there, because the challenge in part has been is that they just didn't have the data. And you didn't have the data to understand the value of mobile relative to, and let's just stick with television, radio, magazines, internet as sort of the competitive set there, to really know what to do with mobile. And that didn't exist until the MMA 2 years ago raised a bunch of money and went and built a methodology. So John or Julie, any marketer, couldn't have even measured mobile in a marketing mix. They had no understanding. We now know that. And the data is, which we're releasing in 2 weeks, by the way, but I'll give you a preview here, is that a marketer today should be spending between 10 to 15% of their budget in mobile. And that's 10 to 15% of the whole pie, not just digital, but the whole pie would be the optimized level of mobile. And that's at smartphone penetration at 55%. So as that moves up, which we all know it's going to move into the 85, 90% range, because that's where feature phones are, at least in the States, you'll see percentages go 15 to 20% of a total mix in mobile.
How did you get there? How did you get to that number?
Okay, so we literally built a methodology to be able to measure the impact of mobile and tie it back to cost relative to television, and we use the same methodology for television, same methodology for radio, newspapers, magazine, whatever the brand was doing. And so I can fundamentally tell you what's the value of $1 invested in each one of those channels and the return on that for your brand metrics, whether that be brand awareness, purchase intent, or even sales. We did a study with Coca-Cola that demonstrated sales. And we actually saw, John didn't have this data. We know sales went up upwards of 5% for Coca-Cola just by moving to more mobile. Is 5% a big deal to a company that size? Absolutely, absolutely. And the data didn't exist. And in fact, it didn't exist until I just said it here today, honestly. In some regard.
You heard it first.
Julie?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that kind of the 15 to 20%, because at some level, now when you run an awareness campaign, even if it's a deeper content campaign, there's a really good chance that almost all of that is getting accessed through mobile.
Yeah.
So one of our kind of insights was every campaign we have to be evaluating it and seeing how it performs, both on desktop and on mobile. But also knowing that when you run a campaign, 50 to 60% of the people that are looking at that campaign are probably on a mobile device. Right. So even though the mobile-specific spend may be 15%, could be 50% of the people that you're reaching are actually viewing your campaign on mobile.
Right. We could be undercounting in the methodology.
Yeah.
I bet that's correct.
Methodology,
I bet that's correct. Yeah. And if I could follow on that, Rashad Tabakawala over at Viviki has a great phrase, right, that the future doesn't fit in the containers of the past. And just even pragmatically, we get in discussions about when we're doing investment mix reports about TV, print, right, and digital. So is display social on mobile, or is it in desktop? These are just even some of the most fundamental, basic, pragmatic things that are hindrances, right, to moving more to a truly consumer-centric kind of view, because we're still looking at these, if you will, these containers of the past, and they need to fit in these containers in order to really action them in the current way that most companies are structured.
So I just want to remind the audience that while we're having this conversation, please do submit questions via the app, and we can get to them during the Q&A, as well as taking live questions from the audience. But one thing that we were talking about backstage, and I'd love to hear more on, is how mobile is changing the relationship between customers and their brands. So what type of data can you get through mobile that informs your broader marketing strategy? What are some maybe specific examples within the Kellogg's brand, maybe we'll start with you, that you've seen across your brands that might be interesting to hear about?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. It's a little cliche to say that it's going to be transformative, but the reality is that all disruptions are transformative. Whether it was whether it was print to radio to TV, and now what we're talking about in digital/mobile, and the way that it has affected us is actually making a distinction between the consumer and the customer. So in our world, the customers, the Walmarts, the Targets, the Krogers, largely, if you will, and then of course the consumer. And again, I think you mentioned the data. We absolutely know that now the majority of people are experiencing our brands in some form of mobile environment. So that's a data point that we know. And we also have great visibility into what they're doing, whether they're looking for price, whether they're comparison shopping, whether they're looking for nutrition information or recipes. So what this has done is it has given us a much more kind of intimate view into the consumer, whereas we would, in the past rely more on panel data or kind of large cohort data. The reality is that now, we know what, largely we know what you would like if you're shopping at Whole Foods or what have you, or somebody else, and that. So we know that, but the key is how do you get that back into the machine? How do you get that back in to the organization and use that data to inform insights that truly inspire ideas, right? And that's the missing link right now. I would say largely that's the missing link.
And what's the challenge there? How are you thinking about bridging that gap?
Well, it goes back to, and that's kind of why I mentioned we need to be more like Dropbox. It's a cultural thing. It's part culture and it's leadership. It's actually those things. I mean, it's really not a technology issue. We do have some technology things that we need to work through and so forth. And Greg and the board are doing wonderful, pushing it forward wonderfully in the organization. But largely, it's a leadership and a cultural change that we have got to really embrace.
And is it that there's concern internally about respecting the consumer's privacy, that they don't want to make use of this data, or?
No. So let me make sure this statement comes out correctly. We're absolutely concerned about privacy and the respect for it, but that actually is not the deal. That's not the issue. And I find it a lot of times people will use some other privacy or various other things as an excuse. Honestly, I think it's an excuse. Fundamentally, we would never do anything that would hurt our consumers. It's just not a logical decision, right? We have long-term brand equity, so we need to treat the consumer with respect. That's first and foremost. But what we have to do, there's this tension with driving immediate volume, sales, and brand equity, right? And it goes back to the mix and the tools that we have in the toolbox that we know that the brand team says, I know that's going to work. I've got all the data, that can tell me that. And as Greg said, now we've got data, right, that can start to push on that. Say, okay, you know that, but now you also know that mobile can drive volume as well. So that's great. The last kind of major missing link is again the ideas. And how are you going to develop an experience? Those brand teams are largely our agency networks, our agency partners, which we love to death. Again, we don't have the playbook. We don't have the great clarity as to what that experience needs to be in mobile. It's not an excuse. I'm just giving you what we need to tackle now.
Julia, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think it's hard for every company that's a transition. And one thing that we found as we were approaching mobile is it was great to have the data. We're a very data-driven company. But part of it was also getting deeper with those customers and actually doing the live customer interviews and really understanding how they were using mobile in their lives, right? Because that interaction both informed our product in terms of the product capabilities we needed to develop on mobile, but then it also informs the way we think about what are the right ways to market to people on the platform, on their devices. So sometimes what I found in companies is sometimes the quantitative data isn't enough, and if you can bring more people into understanding that kind of very customer-centric view of how is this thing we call a trend really affecting people's lives, and engineering teams see that, and marketing teams see that, then people seem to start to kind of imbue that in what they're trying to achieve. So it kind of gets beyond even the metrics and the numbers to say like, wow, how has this really become a part of our customer lives? Like when we look at what people are doing on mobile with Dropbox, particularly our pro customers and our business customers, they're touching Dropbox 70 times to 100 times a day. Like it's such a critical part of their life that we realize like we need to be in there really understanding what people are trying to do and what problems we're solving for them.
Do you see, Greg?
Sure, if I could back up sort of Julie's, I think your intuition there in that we did a bunch of research amongst marketers a couple of years ago. Certainly developed a concept around that mobile is not just marketing transformational, but is business transformational. So in support of what you've both said. We also did a whole series of positioning. In fact, we hired Jim Stengel, the former CMO of Procter & Gamble, to develop a positioning for an industry as big as the mobile marketing industry. And the conclusion from that is that mobile is the closest you can get to your consumer. That's a pretty powerful positioning relative to some of the other marketer channels. And I think that it's what you really just said. And so you see that come up, like, for example, Dunkin' brands, and I want to be careful about speaking about a company I don't work at, but John Costello is my chairman, the CMO, he's president CMO of Dunkin'. And here you take a company like that, they've now built an app that helps them to understand what their consumer is doing on a very regular basis, which informs then both how they work and fulfill and satisfy that consumer. And that's something that would never existed within a company like that before. They never would have had a connection to their consumer, maybe in some simple loyalty program that probably only half-hearted work, but mobile makes that all possible. It's a very powerful idea and very competitively threatening to those who don't do it, I think.
And how do you see the norms societally, I guess, or culturally evolving? Because what one person may tolerate on their TV is different from the type of marketing they might tolerate on their desktop versus their mobile. People sort of have an intimate relationship, as you say, with the mobile phone, which is why it's such a powerful tool. It's the closest you can get to the customer. But when does it get too close? Is that a challenge that you see, Greg?
Well, I think consumer the big issue with that is not what it does, but whether or not the consumer ultimately is given control. And so as long as the consumer, and I think, I'm an iPhone user, so I experience it through that. I think Apple's done a very good job of giving me almost too much control over who do I give location to, who do I give permission to message to. I wrote a blog post a couple years ago that was the basic title was something to the effect of, says, intrusiveness is dead, long live intrusiveness. And so in TV, you have this sort of commercials that come in 17 minutes an hour, and we somehow accepted that and sort of rejected it. Now we have this incredibly personal device, a mobile device, and I get messages all day long on the cover of that, and I appreciate it. Every single time. And if they go too far, then I can modify my experience with that. And so as long as I think the consumer has that control and appreciation, then I don't know that we have as big an issue. Although, John raised the point. Privacy is always something to be sensitive to.
Julie, did you want to?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it goes back to thinking about what people are doing on the mobile device too. Like you could try a more intrusive mechanism. Might work, but you may also want to think about, wow, on the mobile device, people are spending a good percentage of their time consuming content or consuming video. So how do I fit into the environment they're already in? So knowing where they're going naturally and then figuring out how you can incorporate your messages into those places can be incredibly effective.
So we'll take some questions from the audience, but one last question, this question that we're asking all of our panelists. Maybe we'll start with you, Jon, and then I'll ask you, Julie. If there was one thing that you could ask of your CEO to help accelerate the strategy that you think is best for Kellogg, what would that one investment be?
The investment or just
What if you could ask your CEO for one thing?
One thing?
To help make your job easier. Not just, you can't say, the answer can't be cash. But one priority that you think would strategically help what you're trying to do.
And interesting, because I was just with him day before yesterday, and this came up, very interesting. And it's actually not investment. And usually that is when, that is usually the first word, right? And he's always, let's not have that be the first answer to everything. But it's what it is it's in our world, it's insights and planning in analytics. That's the one thing, and how that manifests itself is in people. So, and I just asked them this 48 hours ago, if I could have anything, I wouldn't be asking for any capital. I'm not looking, I've got enough media investment. What I need are people that are very adept at understanding human behavior, as well as how to draw deep insights out of data through analytics. That's the one thing I'd want.
Yeah, no, I mean, the great thing is the thing that's probably most important to me is something that Drew has already imbued very much in the company, our CEO, which is really a culture of inquiry around customers and giving us the resources to go do that inquiry and have those insights. So for me, what's most important is making sure that we understand what the customers are doing on mobile, also in North America, internationally. Like, we're a company where 70% of our users are outside of the US. Mobile becomes an even more important platform there. So it's really licensed to go do that, but also bring it back broadly into the company. Because again, the things you're going to learn are going to affect product, they're going to affect engineering, they're going to affect the marketing that you do. So you can never be complacent. Like, the market is changing. Even what people did on mobile last year is different what people are going to be doing on mobile next year. We find mobile engagement is higher in Japan and the UK as markets for us than they are in some of the other markets. So you really have to look specifically at the audiences that you have and what they're doing with the product. And luckily, that's a core value of the company.
So we'll take some questions. We have a bunch in this middle section, so a microphone will come to you. Let's start with this woman 3 rows back.
Hi, I would like to direct this question to Greg. For a B2B company, what do you think exactly it means to go mobile? And can you, from your experience, can you give me an example of some mobile strategies that have worked for big B2B companies and why they have worked, or what specific questions they were trying to answer?
Yeah, that's a good and a really hard question, because I think the challenge we run into with B2B is that there is no such thing as a B2B category. In other words, the tech companies don't really care what the home builders are doing, and vice versa. So I've often found that you end up in this sort of dynamic of, you're just in this dynamic of, like, it's hard to learn from so different industries. So that's just B2B, because I certainly get a lot of that interest. We haven't yet started a committee within the MMA, but could around that particular topic, or around that whole sector. I think that I'm not sure if I can even come up with a great example of what somebody's done. I mean, Dropbox is probably your best example sitting here on stage. I have seen certainly companies that have. I think this is this concept of being closer to your consumer, and given the relationship that that B2B companies often have to what are often larger customers you might expect in consumers, is probably part of that power. And so how you really develop that and recognize that for all of us, right? There's no such thing as sort of a work and life balance. All that's long gone. And I want to. Oh, I'm sorry. Was that news? I'm sorry. I wasn't supposed to disclose that. Is that okay? So, so I think that dynamic, like, listen, even when I'm watching TV, if I have my tablet, I might look it up there. So I think it's being ready for when the customer's ready. It's really, I don't have anything more significant than that right now on that.
A few rows behind, also in this middle section, a microphone's coming right to you. And I'll ask a question while we're getting the microphone. But one of the questions from the app is, when everything becomes media, mobile becomes less amazing. I think the person probably was talking about the Internet of Things, or the idea of media becoming more pervasive. So what do you see as the big trend after mobable? What's the next?
Come on,
what are we
haven't
talking
even
about?
yet. We're on to the next thing.
Yeah. Can we figure out mobile first? No. Yeah. Want to give it a shot?
That sounds like a punch.
I had somebody. It's very self-serving for me as the head of the MMA to say this. So somebody else said it to me. I'll just repeat theirs. He's the head of a digital agency, and he said, "Greg, we don't think that mobile is the next new thing. We think it is the thing." And it really might be that big a deal.
I think there's an expanded definition of mobile too. When you think about kind of the Internet of Things, which is a buzzword, but I do think it's a trend that we're going to see, where the same technologies that enabled mobile are going to start to enable having these capabilities in your car, in different places in the home. So your access to media does become pretty pervasive. So those experiences won't just be experiences you're having on your mobile phone, but they are experiences that you'll be having with many, many different devices.
Yeah, can I add to that? Actually, we've even toyed around because semantics do play a big play a big role in how you train and guide the organization about getting rid of mobile and think about mobility. It seems like a semantic word game, but it actually isn't. I think it gets a lot to what you're talking about. It's more of a behavior that how we're going to engage, brands are going to engage with consumers. We need to think of the consumer in their lifestyle, of a mobility lifestyle, right? So sometimes I think we attach the mobile to a device-centric view, and that's a good shortcut for now, but it's probably limiting. I think it is limiting into how we are going to think about mobile/mobility moving forward.
So yes, I think you're all ready with your mic.
Stephen Adler, CEO of Charity Brands. We're a 25-year-old corporate social responsibility firm. We're working on a new project for the Consumer Electronics Association focusing on seniors and people with disabilities. And I'm curious about the reaction of the brand leaders, thank you, and the Mobile Marketing Association to these markets as we put a flashlight on them. What's your interest? What should we be doing? Pretty neglected audiences.
Greg, you want to?
Well, listen, I think that the MMA actually would be a great group to sort of tackle some of those issues at an industry level. That's the dynamics of a trade association. So, I would encourage you to get involved with us and let's bring the people together to help solve and satisfy those problems. I haven't had anybody per se raise it yet, but I certainly did when I did internet. It came along, but I haven't heard it mobile yet. So, we should talk afterwards.
Sort of a natural follow-up is someone online asked, pointed to their father who's a tech-savvy baby boomer but wants to live off-grid and has an old flip phone. So what do you do with consumers like that? How do you think about people who maybe because they're concerned about privacy, maybe for other reasons, just don't want to engage on a mobile level?
Yeah, I mean, I can take a shot at that because it's a little bit tangential, but it's related. From our global perspective, I think largely our conversation's been a North American-focused conversation where smartphone penetration is extremely high, but we've got brands in 150 plus countries, and so we need to look, and we do look at feature phone is the dominant device that we're actually communicating with consumers in various other markets. So the point being is, if the consumer is your true north, and you understand their usage, their behavior in this mobile environment, then you're going to craft solutions for them, and they will differ widely from potentially the U.S. to Korea to Argentina to Russia, et cetera. I think if you always keep that in mind, then again, how that person's father would engage on the brand would just be relevant and meaningful to them.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't really feel that, I don't know who asked that question. I don't really feel that's where the world's going. I'm not even really sure I would sort of accept the question at some level because, my 75-year-old mother is very committed to her smartphone, and yes, she texts messages, and my twin teenagers, oh my God, my daughter has sent and received Snapchats. They have a score within Snapchat? 140,000. Average teenager sends 3,300 text messages a month. I think the cow's out of the barn on this one. Like, I'm sure there's going to be a few people who maybe don't adopt it. I think we're there. There's not much resistance.
I do have to say, as a company that builds technology, like one thing we think a lot about is this kind of paradox of we keep piling more technology onto people, and one thing we always ask ourselves is part of our responsibility is to make it easier for people to get things done, right? And very much the viewpoint of Drew and our founders as they founded the company is how can we make accessing your files anywhere and working with other people so easy that you actually have time to do other stuff. So we do try to keep an eye on this kind of paradox of are we throwing so much technology at people that it starts to turn them off. It starts to make their world more complex, not easier. And how can we make sure that we're simplifying that? But I agree. I've got parents on mobile phones too, and it's incredibly great for them.
Yes, just right there, the gentleman who has the mic now.
David Wilcox, Reach Scale. If Lynn from Salesforce is right, then the companies that are breaking silos slowly are not going to be around. So I guess the question would be, do we think switching revenue from digital to another category will break silos? I'd suggest that companies should be looking at things that are much more able to break silos. And an example in the CPG industry is Oxfam's ratings of the sustainability of the top 10 food companies. And the company that moved up from 6 to 2 last year, and the company moved down from 7 to 10, had huge impacts in the marketplace that expanded the conversation to all customers, not just their customers, and got lots of people thinking about whether they should be buying from this company versus that company. That could break down silos in a company. So should we be investing more resources in finding those true silo busters that'll expand digital everywhere?
Well, I would answer that. I mean, I think it's a good point. I'm very familiar with your statement you made. I would suggest that there's multiple silo. I mean, there are multiple silo busting things that we need to do. This conversation happens to be focused on the mobile aspect of it, but there's a series of really key points that need to be discussed and I'll just use the CPG industry specifically. But it really, to me, goes back to my earlier point about agility and how we're currently structured to develop relevant and meaningful relationships with consumers. Your point being one of them. And again, there's a series of those that we have to tackle. But at the end of the day, they do all get back, in my mind, to how we're organizationally designed to meet the needs of the changing marketplace.
I'll take a question from the app. Greg, this is referring to the marketing research that you alluded to, that the question is, what insight can you share on the type of ads that should be served? If 10 to 15% of marketing should go to mobile, are we talking about marketing that is aimed towards building a brand versus trying to prompt an actual purchase? What type of ads?
Sure. So if you want to learn more, the project is called SMOX, just S-M-O-X, as you'll hear us refer to it over the next couple of years. It's a pretty big initiative. Like I said, we raised a couple of $1 million to do it. We will be presenting that research for the first time March 17th and 18th at the MMA's New York Forum. So if any of you are around and want to see it in detail, feel free to address or reach out to me if you're a major marketer, and we'll come present it in your offices if you'd like. But to the question, what we did find in the studies is that mobile does work for brand building, brand awareness. It also worked for purchase intent, sort of further in the funnel. It also worked significantly for store traffic driving. We saw a 26% increase in store traffic driving as a result of mobile being a part of a mix for Walmart specifically. I can give the name on that. And then, as I mentioned earlier too, we saw sales increase for Coca-Cola in the campaign that they did. But in terms of the litany of types of ads, which is part of this question, there's almost too much more than we think we have time for today. So again, I encourage you to reach out to me or follow up at their New York Forum. Join us there.
Can I follow up on just one quick on that? Is that okay? We also, to put a little bit more validity behind Greg's comments there, we absolutely have data that shows that as well. We know that mobile does increase, can break through and drive awareness, purchase intent, persuasion, incremental lift. We have all that data. What's interesting to note, I think, in that question is you look at it, though, in the overall mix. So if you're going to put it from 5 to 10% or 5 to 15%, especially in this current environment where the pie isn't particularly getting much bigger, that means you're taking it from something else. That, to me, is where we need, Greg, we talked about this on the board at the MMA, that's where we need to continue to push in and say, if we're going to increase it, does that mean it's coming from TV? Does that mean it's coming from some other area? Because I can tell you right now, at least in the current environment, incremental investment is incredibly hard to come by.
One other point, I think, just on mobile marketing, and this is my last role, but we had situations where, we had a mobile app. I was a mobile-only, not mobile, first like mobile-only company before I was at Dropbox, a company called Lookout. And what we found is in distributing the app, looking at this, like the connection between when a TV ad runs, we were part of the Droid Does campaign, and when that TV ad ran, we could see exactly what was happening in terms of the app distribution and how many were downloading the app. It really underscored the fact that it's not only in mobile, that if you can kind of mix awareness, or when we were on the Good Morning America show, like you could actually see what was happening with app distribution very clearly through Google Play and the App Store. So I think there's that spend distribution, but then I think it's also how do you start to integrate different media types as you're thinking about what you want to attain on mobile.
You've been waiting very patiently, yeah.
Hi, Bill Robinson. I write technology and entrepreneurship columns for the Huffington Post. Thanks all for your stirring commentary. I was immediately struck by this fascinating contrast between old school Kellogg and new school, just kind of entering kindergarten, Dropbox, both attacking mobile. And I think it's amazing. Kellogg, of course, big corporation, old brand, very well established, good beachhead, came into my consciousness pre-toddler. And then, you know, Dropbox, of course, Drew and Aaron raised more than $250 million in venture capital before they had 200 employees. So a totally different culture. I think I'd rather have Julie's job than yours because
Maybe Julie will hire me.
well, because it's so stunning how, you know, they were born online and on mobile. Without that, they wouldn't exist. But you have this challenge of marketing and branding on mobile with a product that can't be consumed on mobile, whereas theirs is entirely consumed on mobile and can't be consumed in person. So I don't know, agree, disagree, take umbrage?
You know, I mean, it's hard to disagree with your comments. I think they're right. But what I will say is that from a Kellogg perspective, we are blessed with really powerful, meaningful brands that hopefully you said you engaged with a toddler, and I would hope that you do today. So we have a great responsibility. I mean, you know, I take it as an incredibly strong responsibility to make sure that these brands remain meaningful and relevant for the next 100 years. So I mean, I'm not sure if it's easier or harder. I know we both have challenges, but I do believe that the assets that our current team has been given to really use mobile to be much more, again, intimate and understanding the consumer is a fantastic challenge. I mean, it's why I come to work fundamentally. So I guess that's what I would say to that. Unless you do have an offer, then we'll go down a different path.
Yes, no, and Dropbox is a great brand, but we aspire to be that brand that's around, you know, not for tens of years, but hundreds of years. I do think that the digital technology we have, and I don't want to sound like I think digital is the only way to market, because I really do believe in mixed media, but I think even on the retail side, we're starting to see a lot of breakthroughs from mobile. The fact that we have location, that you can kind of think about where people are buying. So even though it may seem that Dropbox is easier because you have that kind of all digital flow, one thing for us is thinking about when are people not in the digital flow, and how can we have them kind of thinking about and understanding Dropbox and those other places too. And then you actually have lots of opportunity to interact with people in the real world, but then some of the challenge is probably how do you mix digital with the real world?
Yeah, and if I just one follow-up point, this is obviously talking about marketing largely, right? And we think of that as far as creating demand and preference. But I think you made the point earlier, where we see some of the biggest advantages, or hopefully opportunities, I should say, for mobile, is again getting closer to the consumer to inform innovation. And true, I mean, that's right. I mean, at the end of the day, we're selling you cereal, we're selling you, chips, we're selling you vegetarian food, and we need to understand how getting closer to the consumer can inform the innovation and really inspire new and wonderful products.
Any more questions from the audience?
You know, I'll add to your point why they're picking somebody else there, but I had the head of the CMO of a hospitality company tell me, they said internet clearly changed the booking process. Mobile changes everything. And I was really struck, whether that's true for every segment or not, we'll see, but it's pretty dramatic.
Yes.
I just have a quick question. Is there a serious discussion about safety implications? The more we are, marketing with mobile devices and people are having mobile things wherever they are, is there a serious discussion about, distraction while driving, distraction while operating machinery, distraction while manning an Amtrak train? Is that a kind of serious discussion that's also happening with this?
Absolutely. I think as the head of the trade group, I should probably respond to that. So there is a very concerted effort by the Ad Council. I hope everybody here knows who Ad Council is, that is very fixated and focused on that because it is an incredibly serious issue. And you're right, we always have these difficult transitions with any new technology. I don't know that any of us sort of really solved this one coming in this way, but it's a really big deal. Totally agree. And the MMA is very serious about doing every we can to both educate and, if necessary, change regulation or laws or whatever to make sure that we keep people safe. Absolutely.